The night wrapped round Lena like a cold, damp blanket. Every inch of her body ached, and the forest was alive with noises that made her flinch with every passing minute. But the warmth of the dog next to her was her lifeline. It didn't speak, didn't make promises, but it stayed. She glanced at it again. It had curled up against her side, its ribs clearly visible beneath its sturdy fur. Whoever this dog was, it looked as alone as she felt. "I'm going to call you, Shadow," she whispered, her throat dry and her lips cracked. "You came out of nowhere, like a shadow." The dog's ears twitched, but it didn't move away. Its chest rose and fell in rhythm. Calm and steady. That steady breathing became Lena's comfort as she drifted in and out of sleep, waking each time a sharp sound broke through the woods. At one point, she thought she heard footsteps, human footsteps. She tried to call out, but her voice barely left her throat. All that came out was a broken whisper, and the darkness swallowed it whole. No one came. As the hours dragged on, the reality of her situation began to settle like fog over her thoughts. Her mother had left her there. She hadn't gone to get help. She hadn't even looked back. That truth hit harder than the rock that injured her. Lena had no idea why. Was it because she was too much? Because she'd asked too many questions at home? Because she didn't get perfect grades? None of it made sense. Her mother had smiled at her just that morning, but that smile now felt like a mask. The pain in her back pulsed through her body, making her nauseous. She tried to sit up, but immediately collapsed. Her legs were still numb. "Please," she whispered to the sky. "Please, somebody find me." The stars twinkled above like tiny sparks of distant hope, but the forest remained indifferent. Shadow stirred beside her, standing suddenly, alert, his nose pointed into the distance, ears up, tail stiff. He gave a low growl. Lena held her breath. She could hear rustling again, heavier this time, closer. Something was out there. The dog didn't move from her side, just stood protectively over her. The rustling faded into silence, and after several tense minutes, Shadow slowly laid back down. You're protecting me?" she asked weakly. The dog nuzzled her side gently. That small act cracked something open in her heart. In all her life, Lena had never felt this protected, not even at home. Her mother had always been unpredictable, one day warm, the next cold. But this stray dog, ragged and abandoned like her, had chosen to stay. She reached out a shaky hand and ran her fingers through Shadow's tangled fur. It was matted in places and full of burrs, but soft beneath the dirt. He let her touch him, even leaned into her hand. "You're my best friend now," she murmured. "Maybe my only friend." The wind picked up through the trees, and Lena pulled her jacket tighter with her one good arm. Shadow leaned closer, sharing his body heat, and soon she was asleep again. Her breathing shallow but steady. Morning would come. She didn't know what it would bring. Maybe another lonely day, maybe help, maybe nothing. But for now, she wasn't alone in the dark. Morning came slowly, its light creeping between the tall trees like a cautious visitor. Birds chirped above, their songs distant and cheerful. In stark contrast to Lena's grim reality, she opened her eyes to a pale sky, and the steady warmth of Shadow still curled beside her. His head lifted when she stood, eyes alert and fixed on her. "Still here," she whispered, surprised at how weak her voice sounded. Her body felt heavy, her back still radiating pain. She tried to move her legs again, even just her toes. Nothing. A knot of fear twisted in her stomach, but she pushed it aside. She had to stay calm. She reached for her backpack, which had tumbled beside her during the fall. The zipper was bent, but she managed to open it. Inside, everything was damp. Her water bottle had cracked open. The map was torn. Her flashlight was shattered. There was one thing left, a crumpled protein bar, barely intact. Lena tore it in, half and handed a piece to Shadow. He sniffed it, then gobbled it gratefully. "You saved me last night," she said softly. "Maybe today you'll save me again." The silence of the forest was broken only by distant rustling and birdsong. Lena had never realized how loud quiet could be. Every noise made her flinch, every snapping twig was a maybe. Every breeze felt like a whisper from something unseen. Hours passed. The sun rose higher, and the heat settled in. Sweat clung to her skin, and her lips were dry and cracked. She tilted her head back, letting the sun touch her face. That warmth was all she had left. But then Shadow stood suddenly. His body stiffened, ears perked, nose twitching. He turned his head toward the thick woods behind them. "What is it?" Lena asked, her voice tight with hope and fear. Shadow didn't bark. He simply stared, tail frozen midair. Then, like he'd made a decision, he ran off into the trees. "Shadow," Lena cried, panic flooding her chest. "Don't leave me." His figure vanished among the trees, and silence rushed in behind him like a crashing wave. For a few minutes, Lena just lay there, stunned, abandoned again. But just as quickly as he had vanished, Shadow returned. In his mouth was a branch long, dry, and covered in leaves. He dropped it beside her and barked. Lena blinked. "You want me too?" "What?" Shadow barked again and nudged the stick toward her. She reached for it slowly, understanding dawning. He wanted her to use it. It wasn't much. It was crooked and splintered. But Lena grabbed the branch, positioned it near her arm, and began dragging herself inch by painful inch toward a cluster of trees where the ground leveled. Shadow stayed beside her, sometimes walking ahead, then circling back as if to guide her. The journey was slow, grueling. Every inch felt like a mile. But Lena kept going, the branch scraping the earth as she pulled herself forward. By the time she reached the flat ground, her arms burned and her palms bled. She collapsed, gasping for breath. Shadow laid down beside her, his tongue lolling as he panted from his own efforts. "You're not just smart," she whispered. "You're amazing." The sun was beginning to dip behind the trees again, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Another night was coming. Lena could feel it in the air. She looked up at the fading light, her heart aching. Would anyone even notice she was gone? Did her mother tell anyone she was with her? Did anyone care enough to look? The questions circled like vultures, but she forced them down. She had to survive first. Answers could come later. As night approached, Shadow became restless. He paced, sniffed the air, growled into the trees. His protective instincts were on high alert again, and then Lena heard it. Fall off. A sound, a crunch, footsteps. She held her breath. Shadow stood still as a statue, then barked sharply once, twice. The forest went still. Even the birds fell silent. Someone or something was out there. And they were getting closer. She had Shadow, and Shadow wasn't going anywhere. Lena's heart pounded in her ears as the forest seemed to hold its breath. Shadow stood stiffly, his body tense and ready. His eyes were fixed in the direction of the sound. Then another crunch. Closer this time. She didn't know whether to feel hope or terror. What if it was a bear, or some stranger even more dangerous than the forest itself? She was completely exposed, vulnerable. Shadow growled again, louder now. Then, through the trees, a figure appeared, a man. He was dressed in hiking gear, his face sunburned and tired-looking, a backpack slung over one shoulder. He froze when he saw Lena. "Oh my, are you okay?" he asked, Rushing forward, Lena tried to speak, but couldn't get the words out. Her throat was dry, her voice stuck. The man dropped to his knees beside her, pulling out a water bottle. "Here, take small sips," he said gently. Lifting her head, she drank gratefully, her hands trembling. "I'm Jake," he said, his voice calming but urgent. "I was hiking the South Ridge. This dog, he came out of nowhere, barking at me, like crazy, then running off. I thought something was wrong, so I followed him." Lena looked at Shadow, who now sat beside her calmly, his tail wagging slightly. The dog licked Jake's hand once, then turned back toward her like his mission wasn't finished yet. "You're hurt," Jake said, examining her quickly. "Can you move your legs?" She shook her head. "Okay. We're going to get help. Just hang on." "All right." Jake pulled out a bright orange emergency beacon from his pack and snapped it open. A red light began to blink. "That'll send out a GPS signal," he said. "Help should be here in an hour or so." For the first time since the fall, Lena felt like something solid was beneath her fear. "My name's Lena," she managed to whisper. "My mom. She left me." Jake's face darkened, but he nodded slowly. "We'll talk about that once you're safe. For now, you just focus on staying awake. Can you do that?" Lena nodded faintly. He took out a thermal blanket and gently wrapped it around her shoulders. "You're very brave," he said, giving her a reassuring smile. "And that dog, he's one smart little guy." Shadow wagged his tail, then sat close to Lena's side like he understood every word. The minutes passed slowly. Jake talked to her the whole time about the weather, the mountain trail, even a funny story about how he once got stuck in a tree trying to rescue a cat. It was just enough to keep her distracted from the pain. Then, in the distance, came the sound of helicopter blades. The deep, thumping noise grew louder until it filled the forest. Jake stood up and waved his arms. The chopper hovered above the trees. Moments later, two paramedics in bright red suits descended on ropes. They moved quickly and carefully, checking Lena's vitals and securing her to a backboard. "You're going to be okay," one of them said. "We've got you." Lena's eyes stayed fixed on Shadow as the crew began lifting her into the air. He let out a soft bark. "No," she said weakly. "He comes with me." One of the paramedics looked at Jake, then nodded. "We'll bring him." Shadow was scooped into someone's arm's muddy paws and hoisted into the helicopter right behind her. As they lifted off, Lena looked down at the trees that had nearly become her final resting place. And for the first time in 2 days, she wasn't scared. She was safe. She had Shadow. The hum of hospital machines replaced the sound of wind in the trees. Lena opened her eyes to a ceiling painted white, the scent of antiseptic thick in the air. She blinked slowly, the fluorescent lights above her too bright. Her body felt heavy, but there was no longer the cold bite of the forest floor beneath her. Then she felt it, a warm weight resting on her legs. Shadow. He was cold at her feet, sleeping soundly. One ear flicking as he dreamed, and Nurse had tucked a small blanket over him, as if he were just another patient. "Hey, you're awake," came a voice from beside her. It was Jake, sitting in a plastic chair by her bed, looking relieved. "You made it through surgery just fine," he continued. "Doctors said your spine was bruised, not broken. You'll walk again. It'll just take time." Lena nodded slowly, absorbing the words. Shadow stayed. Jake smiled. "He refused to leave your side." He even growled at a doctor who tried to move him. Lena gave a small laugh, her first in days. That sounds like him. Over the next few days, Lena settled into the children's ward. Physical therapy began immediately, painful, exhausting, but necessary. Nurses and staff started referring to Shadow as the therapy dog who adopted a girl. He wore a blue vest now, marking him as official, though he never acted any different. He still laid beside her at night, followed her wheelchair down hallways, and barked if anyone came too close. The hospital staff loved him. The media, however, wanted more than love. Within a week, Lena's story was everywhere. Girl abandoned. In the forest rescued by stray dog flashed across screens and headlines. News crews requested interviews. Lena's face was on the front page of local papers. The town that once felt too small to notice her now couldn't stop talking about her. With the attention came questions. Reporters pressed for answers. Why? Had Lena's mother left her there? What kind of woman would abandon her own child? Authorities stepped in. Police came to the hospital, not just to check on Lena, but to speak with her directly. Detective Morgan, a kind-eyed woman in her 50s, sat at Lena's bedside one afternoon. Her tone was gentle, but firm. "Lena, I need to ask you something difficult. Are you okay with that?" Lena nodded. She felt stronger with Shadow sitting beside her. "Did your mom hurt you before you fell?" "No," Lena said quietly. "I slipped. I fell. But after I fell, she just stood there." Then she walked away. Detective Morgan's brow furrowed. "Did she say anything before she left?" "She said, 'I'm sorry.' Then she was gone." The detective leaned back. "Do you know where she might have gone?" Lena shook her head. "I don't think she ever planned to come back." That answer seemed to confirm something the detective already feared. By the next morning, Lena learned the truth. Her mother hadn't reported her missing. In fact, she had driven across the state line the same night Lena fell. Police tracked her down in a small motel in Idaho. She was rested quietly. The hospital kept the details soft for Lena's sake. They told her she was safe now, that she wouldn't have to worry, that a foster care representative would visit soon. But Lena wasn't thinking about custody or courtrooms. She was thinking about how it had taken her dog astray. Starving dog to show her more love into days than she had felt in years. "You found me," she whispered to Shadow that night. "You never left. You saved me." Shadow lit her hand and curled against her, just like he did in the forest, and she was no longer alone. Weeks passed, and Lena's room at the hospital began to feel more like a second home than a place for recovery. Her legs, once completely numb, had started to tingle with life again. Every inch of progress came with hard work hours of therapy, stretching, and painful attempts to stand, but Lena never complained. She had Shadow. Each time she took a shaky step with a walker, Shadow walked beside her, matching her pace like a trained professional. But he hadn't been trained. He just knew. That was the kind of dog he was. The nurses joked that Lena was the girl with a dog smarter than half the people on the floor. Therapists came in just to watch Shadow's gentle focus. He helped her in ways no machine or medicine ever could. One of the doctors called him a miracle with 4 legs. But Lena didn't think of him as a miracle. She thought of him as family. One afternoon, a woman in a grey suit knocked gently on Lena's door. She introduced herself as Claire from Child Protective Services. "I'm here to talk about your next steps," she said kindly, taking a seat near Lena's bed. "You're getting stronger. The hospital will eventually discharge you. We need to find a safe home for you." Lena's heart panged at the word home. Claire pulled out a folder. "I have a list of families who've offered to take you in, foster families who've passed background checks. Many of them have seen your story and feel moved by what you've been through." Lena listened silently. She wasn't sure how to feel. It was strange knowing strangers wanted her now after being unwanted for so long. Then Claire added, and I've spoken with the authorities about Shadow. There were concerns, but because he's now registered as a service animal, he's officially allowed to stay with you." Lena smiled for the first time that day. "He stays with me," she said. "Wherever I go." Shadow wagged his tail like he knew he'd just been declared family by law. Days later, Lena was introduced to Laura and Mark Jennings, a couple in their 30s who lived just outside the city. They had a small house, no kids, and a golden retriever named Milo. They'd seen Lena's story on the news and sent in a letter asking to meet her. Lena was nervous at first, but Laura's warm smile and Mark's gentle sense of humor eased her quickly. They spoke softly, didn't ask too many questions, and gave Shadow treats from their pockets like they'd been planning to meet him for years. When Lena was discharged a week later, it wasn't into the unknown. It was into something that felt almost like a beginning. The Jennings house was quiet, surrounded by trees, with a large fenced yard for the dogs. Shadow took to Milo immediately, as if they had already met in a dream. Lena got a room with a window facing the woods and a bed with warm blankets, not hospital sheets, the first night. Laura brought her a cup of cocoa and sat with her in silence while Shadow curled at her feet. "You don't have to talk about anything you're not ready for," Laura said gently. "We're just glad you're here." Lena nodded, unable to speak through the lump in her throat. She wasn't used to this kindness without strings, warmth without warning signs, but she liked it. She liked it more than she ever thought she could. One morning, as she stepped carefully through the hallway with her walker, Lena saw Mark sitting at the kitchen table with a newspaper. "You're in it again," he said, holding it up. "They're calling Shadow a national hero." The article featured a large photo of her and Shadow side by side, his vest shining, her smile quiet but strong. The headline read, "Stray Dog Becomes Lifeline for a Lost Girl Now Her Certified Protector." Lena traced her fingers along the photo. She didn't care about fame. She didn't care about the attention. All she cared about was the dog who had found her when no one else had, and that he'd never left. Let me know when you'd like to continue with part 6, where Lena's story reaches an even wider audience, and the world begins to see the strength that's been growing inside her all along. By the time autumn arrived, Lena had exchanged her walker for a pair of crutches. Each day was still a challenge, but she welcomed them like little mountains she was learning to climb, with Shadow beside her. Everything felt possible. At school, she was known simply as the girl with the dog. Everyone had heard her story. Some whispered about it in the halls. Others asked questions they shouldn't have. But Lena stayed calm. She wasn't interested in attention. She just wanted to learn, to move forward, and to live like any other girl her age. Shadow was allowed to attend school with her. He wore a blue vest and sat patiently under her desk during class. He'd rest his head on her feet and give her calm nudges when he sensed her anxiety building. Even the strictest teachers couldn't help but soften when he looked up at them. With those intelligent eyes, Lena had begun writing a journal in the evenings, often curled up with Shadow on her bed. She didn't just write about what had happened. She wrote about how she had survived, about how someone who had every reason to give up had held on instead. One night, Laura found her asleep with the notebook still in her lap. She read a few pages and showed them to a friend who worked for a children's publishing company. The pages traveled from desk to desk until an editor called the house, asking if Lena would be open to turning her story into a book. At first, Lena hesitated, but Laura said something that stuck with her. "Sometimes telling your story helps someone else tell theirs," so Lena agreed. The publishing team visited the Jennings home and spent hours listening to her voice, letting her tell everything, in her own words, about the forest, the pain, the fear, and most of all. Shadow. The book was titled Shadow in the Trees and was released 6 months later. It quickly became a bestseller. Readers across the country wrote letters. Some were children who had been through trauma. Others were animal lovers, and some were simply inspired by her strength. One letter read, "Your story gave me hope when I didn't think I had any left." News outlets picked up the story again, and this time Lena was ready. She appeared on morning shows, sitting tall beside Shadow, who wore a new vest that read co-author. Hosts asked about her journey, her writing, and of course, the dog who had never once left her side. "He saved me," she told one reporter, looking directly into the camera. Not just from the forest, but from giving up. She began visiting shelters to talk about rescue dogs and the power of second chances. Each time she spoke, she reminded people that no life, human or animal, was too far gone to be worth saving. At one event, a girl with a scar on her cheek came up to Lena after she spoke. "You made me feel less invisible," she whispered. Lena hugged her tightly. That moment meant more than any book deal or interview ever could. Meanwhile, the case against her mother quietly moved through the court system. Lena chose not to attend the hearings. She said everything she needed to say had already been written down, and she had no room left in her heart for anger. She made her choice, she once told Laura. "But I made mine, too." Shadow, now healthier and more confident than ever, remained her constant shadow, just as he had been from the first night in the woods. His loyalty never wavered. One crisp Saturday morning, Lena stood at the edge of a trailhead with a group of hikers from a local rescue center. It was the same forest, though a different trail. She took a deep breath and took her first step into the trees. She didn't limp. She didn't flinch. Shadow trotted ahead, then looked back, as if to say, "Let's go. We've got this," and they did. Spring came with soft winds and new blossoms, but for Lena, it brought something else entirely. An envelope. It arrived one ordinary afternoon, left on the kitchen table by Laura with a hesitant look. "It's from the county jail," Laura said carefully. "It's from her." Lena stared at it, her fingers frozen just above the paper. Her mother's name was written in neat cursive, and for a moment Lena saw her face again. The way she had stood on that slope, silent. The way she had walked away. She hadn't thought much about her mother in the past few months. There were too many other things filling her life now. Shadow's silly snoring, book readings at schools, walks with Milo, and warm family dinners, where laughter never felt out of place. But now, that past was back, in the form of a sealed envelope. Lena didn't open it right away. She carried it to her room and sat on the edge of her bed with Shadow resting beside her. Her fingers trembled slightly. She peeled it open and pulled out a folded letter. It wasn't long. "Lena," it began, "there aren't enough words to say I'm sorry, and I'm not going to make excuses. I left you. I was scared, overwhelmed, and broken in ways you never deserved to see. What I did was unforgivable, and I think about it every day. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything at all. I only hope that wherever you are now, you're safe and happy and loved in the way I should have given you from the start. Please know I do love you. I always have. I just didn't know how to show it. I'm sorry I failed you." Lena read the letter twice, then 3 more times. Her face didn't change, but her heart did something strange. It didn't break. It didn't harm. It just settled. She placed the letter back in the envelope and looked at Shadow. "She wrote it," she said aloud, as if trying to believe it herself. "She actually wrote it." Shadow nudged her gently with his nose and then rested his head on her lap. That night, Lena didn't cry. She didn't get angry. She didn't even feel the way she once thought she would if this moment ever came. Instead, she felt something new, peace. The next day, she brought the letter to Laura and Mark. They sat with her on the back porch, the sky pink with sunset, birds chirping in the trees. "I don't hate her," Lena said, "but I don't want her in my life either. Not now. Maybe not ever." Laura nodded gently. "That's okay. You get to choose what's best for your heart. I just want to keep going," Lena said, forward. And that's exactly what she did. A few weeks later, Lena was invited to speak at a national youth conference about resilience. She stood in front of hundreds of people, adults, teens, counselors, and teachers, with Shadow sitting beside her in a tiny suit jacket that someone in the audience had made just for him. She began with the forest. "I was left behind, broken and scared. I thought it was the end of my story. But then something amazing happened. A dog found me. He didn't ask anything from me. He didn't care where I came from. He just stayed. And because he stayed, I stayed alive." She paused, looking out at the quiet crowd. "I know what it feels like to be forgotten, to feel like you don't matter. But you do. You always do. Sometimes the world fails you, but sometimes someone shows up. Even if it's on her legs." She smiled down at Shadow. The audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation. Backstage, a woman hugged her and whispered, "You gave us more than a story. You gave us hope." Lena had never wanted to be famous. She never asked for attention or applause. But in that moment, with Shadow beside her and strangers thanking her for being brave, she realized something. She hadn't just survived the years past, but the memory of the forest never faded. Not because it haunted Lena, but because it had shaped her. It wasn't just the place where everything went wrong. It was also the place where everything truly began. By the time she turned 16, Lena had grown into someone unshakably strong. Her body, once fragile and recovering, now moved with confidence. Though she still walked with a slight limp, she wore it like a badge, a reminder of what she had overcome. Shadow, older now, had grayed round the muzzle, but he was just as alert, just as loyal, and never once stopped being her Shadow. They were still inseparable. Lena's book, Shadow in the Trees, was now being read in middle schools across the country. Teachers used it as part of lessons on resilience, hope, and the bond between humans and animals. Kids wrote to her constantly, sharing their own struggles, their own pain, and how her story made them believe things could get better. One letter came from a girl in Nebraska who had been in foster care most of her life. It ended with, "If Shadow could find you in the forest, then maybe someone will find me, too." Lena kept that letter in her journal. With the support of Laura and Mark, Lena had started volunteering at animal shelters. She didn't just walk dogs or clean cages. She talked to families, helped match pets to new homes, and shared Shadow's story with children afraid to trust again. When the shelter director asked her to speak at a fundraiser, Lena stood in front of the crowd and said, "You never know what a stray can become. My dog didn't just save me. He gave me a future, and he continued to." The day Lena received her college acceptance letter was one of celebration. She had applied to a small university with a strong veterinary program. Her dream wasn't to become a writer or a speaker. She wanted to become a rescue vet, working with animals like Shadow, the ones people left behind, the ones people gave up on. Laura cried when she read the letter. Mark rolled her favorite nail. Shadow wagged his tail as if he had known it all along. Before she left for college, Lena visited the edge of the forest where it had all started. Not the same trail, but close enough. She and Shadow stood beneath the towering trees, the wind. Rustling the leaves above, she crouched beside him, wrapping her arms round his soft neck. "I wouldn't be here without you," she whispered. "I owe you everything." He licked her cheek and leaned his weight against her gently, the way he always had when she needed grounding. That night, she framed a photo from the visit and placed it in her suitcase. It would go with her to school, a reminder, a promise. College brought new challenges, classes, roommates, homesickness, but Lena met them all head-on. Shadow became the unofficial campus mascot, loved by students and professors alike. He sat through lectures, curled up during study groups, and even made an appearance in a university promotional video. Years later, at her graduation, Lena crossed the stage with Shadow at her side. The crowd stood and cheered, not just for a degree but for a girl who had once been left to disappear, and instead had built a life full of meaning. After the ceremony, Lena held Shadow's face in her hands. His eyes were tired, but his spirit still burned bright. "We made it," she said, together. And they had, not just through pain, but through healing, not just through survival, but through purpose. Lena went on to open a non-profit clinic focused on rescuing and rehabilitating injured animals. She called it Shadow's Light on the sign. Above the door was a silhouette of a girl and a dog, standing side by side in the woods. People from all over the country came to her clinic, some with pets, others just with stories. Lena listened to them all, and she always ended with the same words. "Sometimes the person or the animal who saves you is the one no one saw coming." Shadow passed peacefully one golden morning with Lena at his side. He was 16. She held him through his final breaths, whispering her thanks, and even then, even in goodbye, he never left her. Because Shadow didn't just walk beside her. He had led her to a life worth living. She had become someone strong,